Well, hey, what's up, students? Welcome to another week of Students Night Live, our SNL sermon series, YouTube collection, whatever you want to call it. My name is Chelsea Petticourt, and I serve as a high school pastor at Highland Park United Methodist Church. And here we are. It's Holy Week, so let's get started. Insane is it that we are still doing this over Holy Week when all of this information first started surfacing about social distancing and isolation and everything in between? I remember sitting in a meeting and thinking, like, you know what? We'll be back by Easter. I have hope in Easter. The world changes. The world stands still, but somehow feels healthier at Easter. And so I didn't really expect this. Clearly, we filmed this sermon, so it was kind of like something we prepared a little bit to just have as a backup. But I really wanted to be together for Easter, to celebrate the resurrection, to celebrate how the life of Jesus changed everything and what the resurrection means and what it means to not be bound by death and illness and loss, and what it means to have hope and knowing that there's something more, right? And it doesn't feel the same this year. I'm not seeing everyone in their pastel colored outfits. I'm not seeing all the families share the pictures of everyone perfectly dressed in front of. At my church, we have a cross that's like covered in flowers every year. I'm not seeing people take photos in front of that. There's not Easter egg hunts. If you're kind of a weird pet person, like to the extent where it's weird, like me, you might be disappointed because you don't get to take your dog on an Easter egg hunt this year. It's one of my favorite things. I'm in Dallas, and it's a weird community. We really love our pets here. And I'm missing those experiences, but I think at its core is I'm missing the fellowship, right? The moment where Christians get to come together to experience Easter. And my church does a sunrise service. And I will admit right now openly that I was really, really like, ugh, when I found out that that's what I was supposed to be working this year. I'm not a morning person. But what I would give to work that this year, because there's something powerful about starting off in darkness, sitting there, and you kind of can see the people in front of you, and yeah, sure, you're on blankets and there's donuts and coffee at this service, but as we worship together and as someone gets up to preach, as the church, during service you see people, we become one, right? As the church becomes one and light dawns. That's why I love that service, even if I might not have been excited to work it this year. But I think if there's anything all of this has taught me, is that even in the darkness, light's still gonna show up. And if there's anything this has taught me, is that looking at my Bible, the first Easter actually looks a lot closer to what we're doing now than our pastel outfits, our coffee in the church lawn for sunrise service, than the choirs beautifully singing. The first Easter looks a lot like darkness. Let me paint a picture with you, okay? Kind of close your eyes, be drawn in, use that imagination. I'm sure you've had a few weeks to practice building your imagination as you've gotten bored, so close your eyes with me here, okay? The first Easter. It's Maundy Thursday. Maundy actually means command. So it's the day of the Last Supper. And Jesus has commanded the disciples to love one another. As they're practicing this moment at this dinner that we call the Passover, Jesus talks about how the Passover has been, this is kind of like a completion of it, and he breaks bread and tells his disciples, "This is my body given for you." He fills a cup of wine and shares it with them. Right? Keep your eyes closed, keep picturing this scene. This is my blood shed for you and the forgiveness of sins. He tells the disciples, hey, someone's going to betray me. Some of you are going to let me down. Remember, this is going to be dark. Keep your eyes closed. And they're like, what? Who would do it? Judas is sitting there like, well, this is awkward. Wouldn't be me. And Jesus goes to the garden to pray and begs God, like, Lord, if this cup shall pass from my lips, let it be so, right? Jesus, who would want to go to the cross, right? Something students have asked me before is, well, Chelsea, who wouldn't go to the cross, right? If every billions of people in the world, unification with God is resting on your shoulders, wouldn't you go to the cross? I think maybe we've forgotten how brutal the cross is. And also the life Jesus lived to make all of this possible. And so Jesus is, weeping in the garden, right? This is dark. His entire friend, like all of his friends who were supposed to be waiting for him, they fall asleep on him. Some of you know the pain of feeling forgotten, right? This is dark. And these Roman soldiers, they come to take away Jesus. Judas betrays him. Peter kind of freaks out and slices the ear off of one of the soldiers, but then Jesus heals the soldier, like, stay with me, this story is dark. And they take him away. And it gets darker. So then Jesus is before Pilate. Maybe you know this story. Maybe you can watch one of the many Easter movies with your family over the next few days. And Pilate's like, why does everybody hate this guy? Like, I'm not really sure what he did. That's super illegal. Pilate's wife has visions that, like, hey, you do not want to kill this man. Like, he's a good man. And Pilate's like, I don't know what to do. Everyone's yelling at me to do this. And so Pilate's like, all right, I'm going to come up with an idea of, all right, there's this murderer on trial named Barabbas. There's Jesus. The Jewish people I believe it was 7 years, said that they would get to they would free a prisoner or pardon them. And so he's like, all right, who y'all want? Do you want Barabbas? Do you want Jesus? Like, thinking, like, they're going to make the right choice here. Well, what do you know? They choose the murderer. So the murderer's back out on the streets. They want to see Jesus crucified. The worst way to die in the history of humankind, truly. So the story gets darker, right? And now we have Jesus being whipped, beaten, spit upon, made fun of. They take his clothes, and you have him completely vulnerable and nude up on a cross in front of everyone. You don't see that in, the crosses that are probably maybe in your home, or maybe your parents have, like, the cross wall in your house. And Jesus is brutally tortured. And then the story gets darker because Jesus dies. As I'm saying this sermon now, I don't know where we're going to be where maybe it does get streamed. But I know that death is a really big fear in our country right now. And a couple of years ago, I lost my father, and I really struggled with death, and I struggled with this idea of Jesus in the resurrection for some time, because as Christians, we always say, like, we celebrate, like, death isn't the end, we have hope, there's resurrection. And I was like, death is pretty terrible. This is very isolating. This is very lonely. This is depressing and exhausting, and I'm angry and I'm mad, and death feels really final, but I'm a Christian, and not only that, I'm a pastor. I have to have answers sometimes, and it's like, how do I have hope in a resurrection when people I deeply love, I feel like I don't get to take part in their resurrection. And so this story is really dark, right? Jesus dies. And at the same time, don't miss this. Maybe you haven't heard of this part. There's a part in the Bible where it talks about how the curtain was torn in two. What curtain, right? This was a curtain that was something all the way from the Old Testament, where they kind of had something called a tabernacle. It was like a tent that housed the Spirit of God. And now there's a temple that houses the Spirit of God. And the curtain stands between the people and God, because it's so dangerous to, like, be directly in God's presence at this time. But when Jesus dies, the curtain tears and everything changes, but no one has really realized yet that it's changed. Everyone's just scared. And I think we forget this part of the story. Stay with me. You can probably open your eyes by now if they're still closed. The disciples scatter. They're scared. They are probably scared for their lives. I would imagine. They're probably wondering if is it all the past, they've been following Jesus for about 3 years now, or the past 3 years, was that just a waste of time? But Sunday's coming, right? But it's really dark at this point. And eventually, we pick up in this passage where we're going to be in John 20 today, where people have gone to the tomb. Some women have gone to see Jesus. They want to help preserve his body. You can kind of think of this as how sometimes we might visit columbariums at church where there are the ashes of our loved ones, where you might visit a tombstone of a loved one and maybe bring flowers, right? You're kind of paying respects, but you also feel it helps you be near to them. So they go to the tomb and they realize it's empty. But there's some fear there because things still feel, you guessed it, dark. Read this with me. John 20, we're going to start in verse 11 and go through 15. Mary stood outside near the tomb crying. As she cried, she bent down to look into the tomb. She saw 2 angels dressed in white seated where the body of Jesus had been, one at the head and one at the foot. The angels asked her, "Woman, why are you crying?" She replied, "They have taken away my Lord, and I don't know where they've put him." As soon as she had said this, she turned around and saw Jesus standing there, but she didn't know it was Jesus. Jesus said to her, "Woman, why are you crying? Who are you looking for?" Thinking he was the gardener. It's kind of funny. She replied, "Sir, if you have carried him away, tell me where you have put him, and I will get him." Let's stop there. She's crying. She's wondering, where is Jesus? And I think in the midst of everything happening in our world, I have found myself over the past few weeks crying and wondering, where is Jesus? Because we're in darkness. We're isolated. Where is Jesus? And you see Mary say, where is he? Right? They have, look right here in verse 13, "They have taken away my Lord, and I don't know where they've put him." And maybe you've been feeling that these past few weeks in this isolation, or I don't know, maybe you're not like me and you're doing great, but I can admit this has been tough. And there are times where I'm saying, like, they've taken away my Lord, and I don't know where they've put him. I don't know where God is right now. But then we see she didn't know it was Jesus. And so maybe the question right now in our world is not, where is God? The question is, am I missing God? Because no matter how dark it is, the sun still rises and light still wins. And this is the darkest Easter in this text here that's ever happened, and Easter is never this dark again. And in this moment of isolation and distancing and loss and sickness, maybe Jesus is here. We're just not seeing it right now. But see, the passage continues, right? Mary thinks that Jesus is the gardener. "Sir, if you've carried him away, tell me where you've put him, and I will get him." Jesus said to her, "Mary?" She turned and said to him in Aramaic, "Rabboni," which means teacher. Jesus said to her, "Don't hold on to me, for I haven't yet gone up to my Father. Go to my brothers and sisters and tell them I'm going up to my Father and your Father, to my God and your God." Mary Magdalene left and announced to the disciples, "I've seen the Lord." Then she told them what he said to her. Mary Magdalene is called by name, and then suddenly she knows who Jesus is. And Jesus still, no matter what's going on in our world, Easter still comes, Jesus is still alive, and Jesus is calling you and me by name to go and preach this and tell the world. You see, Mary leaves this conversation and preaches the first gospel message ever in this world. This woman changes everything because she's empowered by God to do that. And God is still calling you by name and me by name this Easter. No matter how dark it may feel, Jesus still shows up. Jesus still gives light, and Jesus still calls you by name and knows you, and knows your pain, knows your anxieties, knows your fears, knows your worries, and knows what's happening in our world right now. And maybe right now we're so stressed and so scared. Jesus is in front of us, but we think he's the gardener, or we think he is someone doing delivery or the Amazon Prime worker. I don't know. We're just not seeing where Jesus is and where Jesus is working right now. But the resurrection is here, and that is a cause for celebration, to show the world that no social isolation, no disease, no law, no even economic downturn can stop us from proclaiming this truth that Jesus is here and Jesus knows us. So I don't know what you're doing this Holy Week. I don't know what your family's doing. I don't know what your personal church is doing. Maybe you're with our church. I'm not sure. But the one thing I'm certain of amongst all of this is the tomb is still empty, and Jesus is saying, Chelsea, and is calling me by name to go and to preach and to tell others that I'm going up to my Father and your Father, to my God and your God. So just like Mary Magdalene left and changed the world forever by being willing to proclaim this good news, I'm going to keep proclaiming the good news, and you can too. So maybe you're like Mary right now and you don't know where Jesus is. You're wondering if they've taken him away. Maybe he has corona and is locked somewhere. I don't know. But know that Christ is still here, and the good news still changes everything. We love y'all. We're praying for y'all, and if you need anything, you can always comment on this account. You can always talk to whoever your youth pastor is, your life group leader is. There are so many people in your corner cheering for all of you, and we pray that you have, though darker, but an incredible Easter.